The thick Maine fog clung to Havenwood's small train station like a damp shroud. Eleanor Vance, her tweed coat already a little creased from the long journey, clutched her leather suitcase against her body, feeling the dampness seep into her bones. The year was 1923, and the promise of a big story had brought her to this remote corner of the world. The anonymous invitation received weeks ago was enigmatic. Come to Havenwood. The truth resides in the whispers. What awaited her was not the usual bustle of a port town, but an almost oppressive silence. The few people moving through the cobblestone streets seemed like ghosts blurred by the mist. There were no children's laughs, no heated arguments from sailors, no clinking of glasses from the tavern. Only the distant cry of seagulls and the constant murmur of the ocean. It was a dense silence, punctuated only by whispers. Eleanor saw them for the first time when an elderly couple passed her on the sidewalk. Their lips moved, but the sound was almost inaudible, a soft breath, like the rustle of dry leaves. The journalist, accustomed to the frantic hum of New York, felt a shiver. It wasn't just the absence of voices, it was the intention behind it. A choice, not an inability. She headed to the town's only inn, a dark wooden structure with windows that looked like empty eyes. The reception bell produced a jarring chime that seemed to echo for too long in the silent hall. A serious-faced woman with hair pulled back tightly emerged from a side door. "Eleanor Vance," she whispered, her voice so low Eleanor had to lean in to hear. "We were expecting you." Eleanor felt the strange knot in her stomach tighten. "Yes, that's me. I received an anonymous invitation." The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, showed no surprise. She merely gestured with her head towards a guest book and a pencil. "Please, sign here." As Eleanor filled in her details, she tried to make conversation, her voice sounding strangely loud in the quiet environment. "This is a peculiar town, isn't it?" The silence. Martha stared at her with eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. "In Havenwood, we've learned to value what isn't said." The laconic and enigmatic reply only piqued Eleanor's curiosity. She knew she was in the right place for a story. The question was, what kind of story? And why the silence? The air in Havenwood was heavy, not just from the fog, but from a gloomy expectation, a secret that seemed to hang over every street, every house. On that first day, as she settled into her room, Eleanor noticed the absence of any radio or phonograph in the inn. The conversations of the few guests she saw were only indistinct whispers that got lost in the old walls. She went down for dinner, where the dining room was full of people sitting at separate tables, all eating in an almost ritualistic silence, only the cutlery lightly scraping against the plates. It was like watching a silent film with the soundtrack stolen. Eleanor tried to approach some local residents with the excuse that she was writing an article about the history of fishing in the region. They responded, of course, but always with the same whispering tone, evasive and with looks that seemed to measure Eleanor's every word. With each attempt, the feeling that something was profoundly wrong grew. The silence was not just a habit, it was a barrier, an armor the community wore to protect itself from something or to keep something locked away. Late that night, back in her room, Eleanor lit the lamp. The window overlooked the main street, now deserted and shrouded in fog. She took her notepad from her suitcase, her pen resting on the first blank page. "The truth resides in the whispers," the anonymous invitation said. But what whispers? And why so much effort to hide the reason for their existence? Eleanor felt a chill down her spine, not just from the damp Maine weather, but from the realization that the story she had come to find was far more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. Havenwood's silence was a mystery in itself, but the questions it raised were the true abyss. Who or what had silenced this town? And why did no one seem to want to talk about it? The anonymous invitation now seemed less like a call to journalistic glory and more like a whisper of warning. If you're as intrigued as Eleanor about what's happening in Havenwood, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this story. Remember, this is a fictional story. Eleanor woke with the persistent ache of unresolved questions. The fog outside her window was just as thick as the night before, muffling the already subdued sounds of Havenwood. After a breakfast eaten in the same hushed atmosphere, she decided to venture out, determined to find someone willing to speak, truly speak. Her first stop was the local library, a small, unassuming building near the docks. It seemed like the most logical place to start digging into the town's history, hoping for a clue about the origin of the whispers. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old paper and dust. An elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose sat behind a counter, meticulously cataloguing books. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost as if he feared disturbing the quiet. "Good morning," Eleanor said, keeping her voice lower than usual, almost unconsciously mimicking the town's custom. "I'm Eleanor Vance, a journalist. I'm researching the history of Havenwood." The librarian, Mr. Abernathy, looked up, his eyes magnified by the thick lenses. He gave a slight nod, his lips moving silently for a moment before a faint whisper emerged. "Welcome. What specifically interests you?" "I'm curious about the town's past," Eleanor replied, trying a direct approach. "Its origins, significant events, and perhaps the unique way the community communicates." Mr. Abernathy's gaze became distant, his hand pausing over a book. "Havenwood has always been a quiet place. Its history is tied to the sea, like most towns along this coast." He gestured vaguely towards shelves filled with nautical charts and old logbooks. "You might find records of shipwrecks, fishing catches, simple things." Eleanor pressed on, her tone gentle but firm. "And the whispers? Is there a historical reason for it? A custom passed down?" A flicker of something, unease perhaps, or a deep-seated caution, crossed Mr. Abernathy's face. He picked up a quill and meticulously dipped it in ink, avoiding her gaze. "Some traditions simply are. They become part of the fabric. Havenwood has always been a town that listens more than it speaks." His whisper seemed to thin even further, a mere breath. Frustrated but undeterred, Eleanor spent the next few hours poring over dusty town records and newspaper clippings. Most were mundane: birth announcements, fishing quotas, obituaries. Then she stumbled upon a series of articles from the Havenwood Gazette, dated about 15 years prior. They described a period of widespread illness, referred to vaguely as the Great Silence, which afflicted many residents. The symptoms were never explicitly stated, but the articles mentioned a debilitating throat ailment and a subsequent difficulty in speaking above a whisper. The newspaper itself had ceased publication shortly after this period, replaced by a single, handwritten community newsletter. Eleanor felt a jolt. This was it. This was the first concrete lead. She found an article detailing the funeral of a prominent town figure, a Dr. Alistair Finch, who had allegedly worked tirelessly during the Great Silence before succumbing to the mysterious illness himself. The article spoke of him as a hero, a man who gave his life for the town. But something about the glowing tribute felt off, overly saccharine. As she was making notes, a young woman entered the library, her steps light and hesitant. She approached Mr. Abernathy, whispering a question about a specific book. Eleanor watched her, noticing the deep circles under her eyes, the way she clutched a small, worn locket. There was a vulnerability about her that compelled Eleanor. When the young woman, who Eleanor later learned was named Sarah, turned to leave, Eleanor intercepted her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. "I noticed you were looking for a book on local flora. I'm Eleanor Vance, and I'm a journalist. I'm trying to understand more about Havenwood's history, especially a period referred to as the Great Silence. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, and she glanced nervously at Mr. Abernathy, who pretended to be absorbed in his cataloguing. Sarah's whisper was even fainter than the librarian's. That was a difficult time. Many fell ill. It was a tragedy. What exactly was the illness? Eleanor pressed gently. The articles are vague. Sarah hesitated, her gaze flickering around the room as if worried someone might overhear. It affected the throat, made it hard to speak. Some never recovered their voices. My grandmother. She was one of them. Her fingers traced the locket at her neck. Was it infectious? Did anyone investigate it further? Eleanor asked, feeling the pieces slowly start to connect. Sarah shook her head, her expression clouded. Dr. Finch did his best. He said it was a rare strain of influenza, but it was very strange. It only affected the voice mostly. Her eyes held a flicker of something beyond sadness, something akin to fear. Some say it was a curse. A judgment. A curse? On whom? Eleanor probed, intrigued by the sudden shift in narrative. Sarah flinched, pulling back slightly. It's just talk. Old wives' tales. Please, I have to go. She practically fled the library, leaving Eleanor with a fresh wave of questions. The Great Silence was more than just a vague illness. It was the catalyst. But a rare strain of influenza that only affects the voice? It sounded too convenient, too specific. And the mention of a curse hinted at a deeper, possibly darker secret. As Eleanor stepped out into the lingering fog, the whispers of Havenwood suddenly felt less like a quaint custom and more like the enforced quiet of a prison. The silence wasn't just a symptom of a past illness. It was a living, breathing entity, protecting a truth that the town desperately wanted to keep hidden. Eleanor realized she had just scratched the surface of a profound and disturbing mystery. The mention of Dr. Alistair Finch and the Great Silence sent Eleanor on a new trajectory. If a specific illness was responsible for the town's unusual communication, then the doctor who treated it would hold crucial answers. She learned that Dr. Finch's former office and residence was a grand, albeit dilapidated, Victorian house on the edge of town, overlooking the harbour. Its paint peeled and overgrown ivy choked its ornate ironwork, giving it a mournful, abandoned air. Eleanor approached the house with a sense of trepidation mixed with anticipation. The silence here was even more profound, broken only by the creak of the old gate as she pushed it open. She tried the front door, but it was locked. Peering through a grimy window, she could vaguely discern dusty furniture draped in white sheets. It seemed untouched for years. Determined, Eleanor circled the house, eventually finding a slightly ajar cellar door at the back. It creaked open reluctantly, revealing a dark, musty descent into the earth. Armed with a small flashlight from her bag, she cautiously navigated the uneven steps, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The cellar was a labyrinth of forgotten crates and cobwebs, but a faint light filtering from above indicated a staircase leading to the main house. She found herself in what appeared to be Dr. Finch's study. The room was dominated by a large mahogany desk, covered in a thick layer of dust. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with medical texts, anatomy charts, and worn leather-bound journals. This was where the answers might lie. Eleanor carefully opened a drawer on the desk, revealing neatly stacked ledgers and a handful of personal letters. The ledgers contained patient records, meticulously detailed and spanning the period of the Great Silence. She noticed a recurring pattern. Many entries noted loss of vocal cord function, whispering only, and unexplained throat constriction. There was no mention of typical influenza symptoms like fever, cough, or body aches. This was not a normal flu. Then she found Dr. Finch's personal journal bound in dark leather. Its pages were filled with elegant, if somewhat frantic, handwriting. She began to read, her heart pounding with each revelation. Entry, May 14th, 1908. The first cases appeared today. A handful of fishermen. They speak only in whispers. A curious affliction, unlike anything I've encountered. No fever, no cough, just the voice, gone. Entry, May 28th, 1908. More cases. It's spreading. The entire fishing fleet seems afflicted. Panic is setting in. The town council demands answers. I have none. Samples sent to Boston, but their reply was unhelpful. Unidentified viral agent, possibly benign. Entry, June 10th, 1908. It's worse than I feared. Entire families are now whispering, the children. Even young Sarah, the blacksmith's daughter. Her parents are distraught. I've tried everything, tonics, gargles, rest. Nothing helps. The silence is becoming a palpable presence in Havenwood. The entries grew increasingly desperate. Dr. Finch detailed his sleepless nights, his frustration, his growing fear. He described a creeping isolation as families withdrew, unable or unwilling to communicate. He also noted a strange behavioral change in the afflicted, a heightened sense of paranoia, a reluctance to look outsiders in the eye, and an almost obsessive need to maintain silence. Entry, July 1st, 1908. They are afraid. Not of the illness, but of something else. Something they believe the illness represents. Whispers of a curse have begun to circulate. Nonsense, of course, but the fear is real. They believe speaking aloud will worsen their condition or invite something darker. Eleanor paused, her breath catching. A curse? Sarah had mentioned it. This was not just a medical anomaly. It was deeply intertwined with the town's psyche. The most disturbing entries came later, detailing Dr. Finch's own decline. Entry, August 5th, 1908. I feel it now, the constriction, a tightness in my throat. My voice, too, is failing. My attempts to find a cure are futile. This is not a virus. It is something else, something that targets the voice. A selective affliction. Entry, August 12th, 1908. The fear has become pervasive. They watch me, they watch each other. Any loud sound, any raised voice sends ripples of unease through the community. They believe I am trying to break the silence. They believe I am dangerous. I hear their whispers, always just out of reach, always about me. The final entry, dated August 20th, 1908, was barely legible, a hurried scrawl. Entry, August 20th, 1908. They are coming, they know, the truth. It's not the illness, it's them. They fear the sound, not the affliction, but the consequence. I understand now, the silence. It's a pact, a terrible pact, the sacrifice. I must try to warn. The journal ended abruptly. The ink smudged as if the pen had been dropped in haste. Eleanor felt a cold dread spread through her. They are coming. They know. The truth. It's not the illness. It's them. This wasn't just a mysterious sickness. It was a conspiracy, a forced silence. And Dr. Finch had discovered something so terrifying that it led to his premature death. The town hailed him as a hero, but his last words suggested he was a victim. Eleanor's mind raced. What pact? What sacrifice? And who were they, the entire town? Or a select group enforcing the silence? The Great Silence wasn't a natural disaster. It was an engineered one, or at least a highly convenient cover-up for something far more sinister. The whispers, she now understood, weren't just a consequence of an illness. They were a deliberate choice, enforced by fear. Eleanor was no longer just investigating a medical mystery. She was uncovering a human drama, steeped in deceit and terror. The walls of the old house seemed to press in on her, holding secrets that whispered their presence in the very air she breathed. Eleanor emerged from Dr. Finch's house, her mind reeling. The journal entries painted a chilling picture. A community held captive not by a virus, but by a pact, and the fear it instilled. The realization that the silence was an enforced measure, not merely a symptom, solidified her resolve. She needed to find someone who had lived through the Great Silence and was willing to talk, truly talk, even if only in whispers. Her thoughts turned to the older residents, those who might remember the Havenwood before the whispers. The fishing docks seemed like a good starting point. Despite the damp chill, a few old fishermen were mending nets, their movements practiced and slow. Eleanor noticed that even among themselves, their communication was hushed, a series of nods, gestures, and barely audible murmurs. She spotted an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and sea, carefully untangling a knot. He had a weary but wise look in his eyes. Eleanor approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," she began, keeping her voice low. "Are you a lifelong resident of Havenwood?" The old man looked up, his gaze steady. He gave a slow nod. "Born and bred. Name's Elias." His voice was a raspy whisper, barely louder than the wind. "I'm Eleanor Vance, a journalist. I'm trying to understand the history of this town, particularly the period around the Great Silence." Eleanor chose her words carefully, watching for any reaction. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly, and he paused his work. He glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers, though no one else was particularly close. "That's a past best left untouched, young lady." His whisper deepened, carrying a faint tremor. "Dr. Finch's journal suggests otherwise." Eleanor pushed gently, deciding to test the waters. He wrote of a pact and sacrifice, and that the illness wasn't what it seemed. Elias flinched, his weathered hands tightening on the net. His face paled beneath his sun-darkened skin. You saw his journal." His whisper was now barely audible, a ghostly rustle. "I did," Eleanor confirmed. "And I believe he was trying to warn someone. He wrote that they were coming for him." Elias slowly straightened up, his eyes now fixed on the distant fog-shrouded horizon. A profound sadness settled over his features. "Alistair. He was a good man, too curious for his own good." He hesitated, a long, drawn-out moment of internal struggle. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Eleanor urged. "What was the Great Silence truly about? What pact? Who are they?" Elias took a deep, shuddering breath that sounded more like a sigh. "It began with the harvest. Not the fish, but the kelp. A rare iridescent kelp that grew in the deepest parts of the harbor. Old man Hemlock, the wealthiest man in town, discovered its unique properties. He believed it could be used for things, potent things. Not for medicine, but for control." Eleanor leaned in, her recorder discreetly held in her hand. "Control of what?" "Of the mind," Elias whispered, the word chilling her. He claimed it could sharpen the senses, calm anxieties, make men more compliant. He convinced a few desperate families, those struggling with their catches, to invest. They harvested the kelp, processed it in secret. Dr. Finch, at first, was intrigued by its potential medicinal uses, but he soon realized Hemlock's true intentions. What were they? "Hemlock didn't want a cure," Elias continued, his voice a strained whisper. "He wanted power. He started giving the kelp extract, disguised as a tonic for focus, to more people, especially those in positions of influence, the mayor, the reverend, the constable. He claimed it would make Havenwood prosper, a community of perfect order. But the side effect? It was the silencing. Not immediate, but gradual. It choked the voice, not just physically but metaphorically. It made people less likely to question, less likely to defy. "So the Great Silence was a deliberate poisoning?" Eleanor gasped, horrified. Not exactly poisoning, Elias corrected, shaking his head. More like a conditioning. The kelp, it didn't destroy the vocal cords. It instilled a deep, primal fear of speaking aloud, a psychological block. If you tried to raise your voice, you felt an unbearable pressure, a tightening in your throat, a pain so intense it would make you collapse. It was a subtle, insidious control. Hemlock called it the harmony of silence. And the pact? The pact was their obedience. Once enough people were conditioned, Hemlock, along with his inner circle, the mayor, the reverend, and a few others he had fully ensnared, made it clear. Anyone who tried to break the silence, anyone who spoke too loudly, anyone who tried to leave and expose them, would suffer, not just physical pain, but a deep psychological torment, a sense of being utterly alone, cut off from everything. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. This was far more sinister than she could have imagined. And Dr. Finch? He discovered this. Elias nodded, a tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. He did. He started to understand that the illness was a deliberate manipulation. He saw how the people changed, how they became utterly submissive. He tried to develop an antidote, something to break the psychological hold. But Hemlock's inner circle, they discovered his research. They knew he was close to exposing them. And they came for him. Eleanor finished, the words heavy with dread. They didn't want the truth to get out. No, Elias whispered, his voice trembling. They silenced him, permanently. And then they spread the lie of the Great Silence, a heroic doctor who died trying to save them. A convenient narrative to keep the town quiet, bound by fear and the insidious kelp. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes pleading. You must be careful, Miss Vance. They are everywhere. They listen. They protect their silence. The fog seemed to thicken around them, pressing in. The distant sound of the waves felt like a warning, the whispers of the town now taking on a new, menacing quality. Eleanor had found her answer, but it was a horrifying one. Havenwood wasn't just silent. It was a cage built on fear and a sinister drug. And now she, an outsider, had started to chip away at its foundations. The true nature of the silence was revealed, and it was far more terrifying than any medical mystery. If you're gripped by the dark secrets of Havenwood and want to see how Eleanor uncovers the full truth, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Remember, this is a fictional story. The revelation from Elias left Eleanor reeling. The Great Silence was not an illness, but a form of psychological control, orchestrated by a powerful figure named Old Man Hemlock. The kelp extract, the enforced whispers, the subtle but profound fear that permeated every interaction in Havenwood, it all clicked into place. The benevolent mask of a quiet, resilient town had been ripped away, revealing a chilling landscape of manipulation and terror. Eleanor spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened awareness. Every soft murmur, every averted gaze, every rustle of clothing on the street now felt loaded with meaning. The townsfolk, once merely peculiar, now seemed like unwitting prisoners, their lives dictated by an unseen hand. The innocence she had initially perceived was replaced by a profound sense of pity and a simmering anger at the injustice. She needed to understand how this system of control was maintained. If Hemlock and his inner circle were still active, they would be constantly vigilant. Eleanor realized she was now a direct threat to their carefully constructed reality. She felt eyes on her, even when no one was visibly present. The fog, which had initially seemed atmospheric, now felt like an accomplice, obscuring potential watchers. That evening, Eleanor decided to observe the town from a different perspective. Instead of directly engaging, she would watch, listen, and map the subtle power dynamics. She found a secluded bench overlooking the town square, partially hidden by a large elm tree. From here, She could see the comings and goings, hoping to identify Hemlock's inner circle. She watched as the town's constable, a burly man named Jebediah, patrolled the streets. He didn't speak to anyone, but his presence seemed to enforce the quiet. People would subtly adjust their behavior, their whispers becoming even softer, their movements more constrained, whenever he passed. He wasn't just a law enforcer. He was a silent guardian of the established order. Later, she saw the Reverend Miller leaving the church. He was an older man with a kindly, if slightly vacant expression. Yet as he greeted a few parishioners, his whispers carried an undertone of authority. Eleanor remembered Elias mentioning the Reverend as one of Hemlock's earliest targets. Had his faith been twisted to serve Hemlock's purpose, or was he a willing participant in the deception? The thought sickened her. The idea of spiritual guidance being used to reinforce fear was a particularly cruel irony. As night deepened, a thin crescent moon appeared through a break in the clouds, casting long, shifting shadows. Eleanor noticed a pattern. Certain individuals, usually older men, would gather in small, hushed groups near the docks or outside the general store. Their whispers seemed more urgent, their gestures more emphatic. Were these the members of Hemlock's inner circle conducting their clandestine affairs? Or were they just gossiping, bound by the same fear as everyone else? It was impossible to tell. Suddenly, a voice, clearer than any she had heard in Havenwood, pierced the quiet. It was faint, distant, but undeniably a spoken word, not a whisper. It came from the direction of the old lighthouse, a beacon that stood sentinel at the furthest point of the harbor. Eleanor's heart leaped. Someone was speaking. She immediately rose, her journalistic instincts overriding her caution. She had to investigate. The lighthouse was a significant distance, and she navigated the winding, dimly lit streets, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The fog swirled around her, making familiar landmarks appear as ghostly apparitions. As she drew closer to the lighthouse, the spoken words grew slightly clearer, though still muffled by the wind and distance. It sounded like a man's voice, strained and filled with a desperate plea. "Please! You can't! This is wrong!" Eleanor quickened her pace, her adrenaline surging. She reached the base of the lighthouse, a sturdy stone structure that loomed like a silent giant against the night sky. The voice was coming from inside. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, which groaned on its ancient hinges. The interior was dark, lit only by the faint glow filtering from the lantern room above. The sounds of a struggle reached her ears, followed by a muffled thud. Then, a sharp, choked gasp, and finally, the familiar, unsettling silence of Havenwood. Eleanor's breath hitched. She fumbled for her flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a spiraling staircase. At the base, sprawled on the cold stone floor, was a man. His eyes were wide with terror, and his hands clutched at his throat. He wasn't dead, but he was clearly in agony, his face contorted in pain. He was trying to speak, his mouth open, but only a raspy, gurgling sound escaped him. Standing over him, a tall, imposing figure, his face obscured by shadow, holding something in his hand, a small, dark vial. As the beam of Eleanor's flashlight caught him, the figure froze. He turned, and Eleanor's light caught his profile for a fleeting moment. It was Reverend Miller, his eyes, usually kind, now burning with a cold, ruthless intensity. He didn't speak. He simply stared at Eleanor, his face unreadable in the dim light. The silence in the lighthouse was absolute, chillingly so. Eleanor felt a surge of terror, but also a fierce determination. She had caught one of them, red-handed. The man on the floor was writhing, clutching his throat, tears streaming down his face as he tried desperately to utter a sound. He was being silenced physically right before her eyes. The Reverend slowly raised the small vial. Eleanor instinctively recoiled, realizing the true horror of what she was witnessing. It wasn't just psychological, it was enforced with a brutal, physical reminder of what happened if one dared to speak. The pact wasn't just a threat, it was a deadly reality. Eleanor was no longer merely observing, she was a witness. And now she was in the direct line of sight of those who protected the silence at all costs. The mist outside pressed against the lighthouse, a silent accomplice to the dark deeds within. The air in the lighthouse was thick with fear. Eleanor stood frozen, her flashlight on Reverend Miller, who stood over the writhing man, Mr. Henderson, the town's postman. Miller's face, chillingly calm, was devoid of warmth. Miller, without a word, tucked the small vial into his pocket. His gaze never left Eleanor's. "You shouldn't have come here. Some truths are meant to remain buried." Eleanor, trembling, held her ground. "What did you do to him?" she demanded. Miller's head tilted. He didn't answer, but his eyes conveyed, "You already know." Eleanor turned to Mr. Henderson, who weakly tried to push up, shaking uncontrollably. "Mr. Henderson, are you all right?" He looked at her, eyes wide with terror and plea. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse, rattling sound escaped. He tried to break the silence, Miller whispered, his voice a chilling monotone. He spoke. Publicly. Against the covenant. "Covenant?" Eleanor scoffed. "This isn't a covenant, it's a prison. You're poisoning people." Miller's composure cracked. "It is harmony, Miss Vance, a necessary measure for this community. Havenwood was chaos. Old Man Hemlock showed us the path to peace. Peace through forced silence and fear. That's tyranny," Eleanor countered. Mr. Henderson, with monumental effort, whispered, He promised freedom, said the words were a cage." He clutched his throat, pain contorting his features. "He made you afraid to speak. He made you his puppets," Eleanor accused Miller. Miller's whisper grew sharper, edged with fanaticism. "The world outside is deafening, Miss Vance. Here, in Havenwood, we have found solace. We have found purpose. We have found order." Eleanor knelt beside Mr. Henderson, whose breathing was shallow. She recognized the symptoms Dr. Finch described: intense throat constriction, inability to vocalize. This was the violent consequence of breaking the pact. "Mr. Henderson," Eleanor whispered urgently, "what did you say? Why did you speak?" With desperate strength, he whispered, "My son. He's ill, needed help. Had to tell. The doctor, in the city. But they wouldn't let me leave. Not with loud words. They said the outside would taint the silence." He choked, eyes pleading. He said he would cut off my tongue if I tried to speak again. Eleanor's blood ran cold. This wasn't just psychological. It was enforced by physical threat. Old Man Hemlock's control was absolute, and Reverend Miller was an enforcer. "Who else is part of this?" Eleanor demanded of Miller, voice trembling. "Who are they?" Miller's gaze hardened. "Those who understand true harmony. The pillars of Havenwood. Mayor Thorne, Constable Jebediah, and of course the wisdom of Old Man Hemlock." Eleanor knew this was her chance. She had names. She had a witness. She had to get Mr. Henderson out. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs above. Miller's eyes flickered. "You've heard too much, Miss Vance," he whispered, chillingly final. "The silence must be preserved." The cellar door, ajar, slowly creaked shut. Darkness pressed in. Two figures descended. Eleanor recognized Constable Jebediah, massive and menacing. Behind him, a thinner, stooped figure whose presence crackled with quiet malevolence. It was Old Man Hemlock. He stopped halfway down the stairs, his face obscured by shadows, but his presence was overwhelming. Eleanor felt primal fear. This was the architect of Havenwood's silent prison. He didn't speak, but his gaze seemed to penetrate her soul. Mr. Henderson whimpered and collapsed, unconscious. Eleanor knew her time was running out. She was trapped with the architect of silence and his enforcers. The presence of old man Hemlock was a physical weight. Eleanor understood Elias's words. Hemlock was the embodiment of the silent terror gripping Havenwood. Constable Jebediah descended, blocking the exit, while Reverend Miller stood beside the unconscious Mr. Henderson. Hemlock, gaunt with sharp, intelligent eyes, finally spoke, his voice a dry, papery whisper, controlled and unsettling. "So the little bird has flown too close to the flame," he whispered, his gaze piercing Eleanor. "We knew you would be curious. The anonymous invitation was a necessary bait, a controlled risk." Eleanor's mind raced. They had invited her. It was a trap. "You invited me here to expose you?" Eleanor retorted, trembling but standing tall. "You underestimate me, and you underestimate the truth." Hemlock let out a soft, imperceptible chuckle. "Truth is a malleable concept, Miss Vance, especially when shaped by fear. The truth of Havenwood is its peace, its order, a peace we painstakingly built from the cacophony of human imperfection." "You built it on lies and coercion," Eleanor countered, gesturing towards Mr. Henderson. "You're torturing your own people." Reverend Miller stepped forward. "He broke the sacred silence. He threatened the harmony we have worked so diligently to achieve." "Sacred silence? This is madness," Eleanor cried. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing pain shot through Eleanor's throat. Her voice faltered, and she gasped, clutching her neck. It felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing her vocal cords. She tried to speak, but only a strained, hoarse sound escaped. Her eyes widened in terror. This was the conditioning Elias had spoken of, the excruciating consequence of speaking aloud. Hemlock's methods were real. Hemlock watched her, a faint, cruel smile playing on his lips. A potent reminder, isn't it? The kelp's essence, refined over years. It creates an aversion, a profound discomfort with loud noise, with defiant voices. It teaches obedience. It teaches silence. The pain intensified, bringing tears to Eleanor's eyes. She stumbled back, hitting the stone wall. "What is this kelp?" she managed to whisper. "A gift from the deep," Hemlock replied, his whisper almost reverent. "Discovered by my ancestors. A rare variant with unique neuroinhibitory properties. We learned to cultivate it, refine its essence. A single small dose, ingested or absorbed through the skin, begins the conditioning. Over time, with reinforcement, the aversion becomes absolute. The Great Silence was merely the mass application of this profound discovery." Eleanor's mind raced through the pain. This was a sophisticated, insidious chemical manipulation. It explained Dr. Finch's physical symptoms and his final entry. "Dr. Finch was trying to expose you," Eleanor whispered. "He found an antidote." Hemlock's eyes glinted. He was a fool. His antidote was merely a temporary palliative, nothing that could truly break the fundamental re-education of the nervous system. "So you killed him," Eleanor accused. "He succumbed to his own foolishness," Miller interjected. "He resisted the harmony. He tried to disrupt the peace we had forged." Eleanor's throat throbbed, but anger surged. She had to think to find a way out. She was now a victim. "Why me?" she whispered to Hemlock. "Why invite an outsider?" "Because the silence needs to be understood," Hemlock replied. "We wanted to observe your reaction, your methods, and then you would become another testament to our success. A silenced journalist, swallowed by Havenwood, an example to any who might think of prying too deeply into our perfect world." Eleanor felt a cold knot of despair. They had planned this. She was meant to be another casualty. The fog outside seemed to press against the lighthouse windows, a silent, complicit shroud. Suddenly, a faint, high-pitched wail broke the silence from outside. A child crying. The sound caused a ripple of unease through the silent men. Even Hemlock's eyes flickered. "The harmony is disturbed," Miller whispered. "It's just a child," Eleanor whispered. "A child's scream can shatter years of work," Hemlock said, his voice unusually sharp. He turned to Jebediah. "Find the source. Quickly. And ensure it is quieted." Jebediah nodded, moving with unexpected speed towards the door. As he opened it, a gust of wind swept into the lighthouse, briefly lifting the fog and revealing a glimpse of the town. In that fleeting moment, Eleanor saw her chance. The open door was her only hope. The pain in her throat was excruciating, but the thought of becoming another silenced victim spurred her to action. She had to escape, not just for herself, but for Mr. Henderson, for Elias, and for exposing Havenwood's horrifying truth to the world. The open door ignited a desperate surge of adrenaline in Eleanor. The excruciating pain in her throat fueled her resolve. As Constable Jebediah stepped through, distracted by a distant child's cry, Eleanor seized her chance. With unexpected speed, she lunged towards the opening. Reverend Miller reached out, but Eleanor ducked under his arm, bursting into the swirling fog. "Stop her!" Hemlock's whisper carried chilling urgency. Eleanor didn't look back. She ran blindly, fueled by terror and pain. The thick fog obscured her path but provided cover. She heard the pounding footsteps of Jebediah and Miller's quicker pursuit. She weaved through the narrow streets, her lungs burning, the salt air stinging her eyes. Every loud breath sent agonizing spasms through her vocal cords. She headed instinctively towards the docks, hoping to find a boat. The child's cries seemed to draw her, a beacon of distress, a reminder of innocent lives trapped in Hemlock's harmony. Rounding a corner, she collided with Sarah, the young woman from the library. Sarah gasped, then stifled the sound, eyes wide with fear. "They're coming," Eleanor whispered, throat raw. "Hemlock. Miller. They're after me. They took Mr. Henderson." Sarah's face contorted. She grabbed Eleanor's arm. "The docks. There's a back way. Through the old net sheds." Her whisper was urgent. "My grandfather Elias sometimes leaves his skiff unchained. This way." Sarah, surprisingly agile, led Eleanor through a maze of dark, dilapidated sheds. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. "Why are you helping me?" Eleanor whispered. Sarah glanced back, eyes resolute. "My grandmother. She was a singer. After the silence, she never sang again, only whispered. She said her voice was stolen. Elias, he trusted you. We all live in fear. You're the first one who ever dared to truly challenge it." A new appreciation for the community's silent suffering flooded Eleanor. Sarah's bravery was a testament to the buried desire for freedom. They burst onto a secluded dock. The fog was thick, but Eleanor could faintly make out a small fishing skiff. "There," Sarah pointed. "The keys. Grandfather always keeps them under the seat." Jebediah's heavy footsteps echoed from the alley. They were almost caught. Eleanor scrambled into the skiff, fumbling under the seat. Her fingers closed around the keys. "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor whispered. "Get away from here. They'll know you helped me." Sarah nodded, a single tear tracing her cheek. "Tell them, Miss Vance. Tell everyone what they did to Havenwood. Don't let our silence be in vain." As Jebediah emerged from the fog, Eleanor frantically tried to start the engine. It sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. The sudden noise caused a sharp, blinding pain in Eleanor's throat. She gasped, doubling over. "She's breaking the harmony!" Miller's furious whisper reached her ears. Jebediah lunged just as Eleanor, gritting her teeth, threw the engine into reverse. The boat lurched, pulling away from the dock. Jebediah missed her, stumbling. The skiff sputtered as Eleanor steered it away from shore, out into the harbor. The pain in her throat was a throbbing agony, a testament to Hemlock's insidious control. But fear was giving way to resolve. She looked back at the receding shoreline, a vague outline in the fog. She saw the faint glow of the lighthouse, a cold, watchful eye. She imagined Hemlock and his enforcers, faces grim, whispers cold. Eleanor was free, but the great silence still gripped Havenwood. She had to expose them. She had to break their silence, not with a whisper, but with a roar. Her voice might be temporarily broken, but her resolve was stronger than ever. The terrifying reality of Havenwood was no longer just a story. It was a scar on her own throat. Eleanor arrived at the nearest coastal town, battered but alive. The pain in her throat persisted, a dull ache from Havenwood's grip. She immediately sought local authorities, but her hoarse, strained whisper was met with skepticism. A remote town where everyone whispers, controlled by kelp and a fanatic cult leader? It sounded mad. "Miss Vance, we understand you've been through a traumatic experience," the sheriff told her gently. "Perhaps you should rest. Havenwood has always been a private community." "They're not just private, Sheriff," Eleanor rasped. "They're prisoners. Hemlock, Miller, Jebediah, they're using a drug to control everyone. Dr. Finch was murdered for trying to expose them." The sheriff frowned. "Dr. Finch? He was a respected man. Died of an illness, as I recall." Eleanor knew she needed irrefutable proof. The journal. Dr. Finch's journal was the key. She had left it in her room at the inn. She also needed Mr. Henderson found and examined. She contacted her editor in New York, Mr. Caldwell. His initial reaction was skeptical, but Eleanor's raw, desperate voice and her reputation convinced him. "Eleanor, this sounds unbelievable," Mr. Caldwell's voice crackled. "But I trust your instincts. Get to a hospital. I'll send a wire to the Maine State Police. Tell them everything. I'll also dispatch a trusted photographer and a seasoned detective from Boston, unofficially for now." This could be huge. Eleanor recuperated for a day, the ordeal weighing heavily. Her throat slowly healed, her voice remaining raspy. She dictated her full account to Mr. Caldwell's assistant. The Maine State Police, however, were slow. Havenwood was isolated. They sent a patrol car, but it returned with reports of a quiet, orderly community. Hemlock had clearly tightened his grip. Frustrated, Eleanor couldn't wait for official channels. She contacted Elias through a coded message via Sarah. Elias confirmed Mr. Henderson was found and under care at Reverend Miller's home, sedated and unable to speak. The town was on high alert. This news intensified Eleanor's resolve. Mr. Henderson was alive, but still a prisoner. She had to go back, not alone. Mr. Caldwell's hired detective, Detective Thomas Thorne, a gruff but sharp-witted man, arrived from Boston. He listened to Eleanor's story, his skepticism giving way to grim recognition. A drug that creates a psychosomatic aversion to speaking, enforced by fear and controlled by a town council? Thorne mused. It's audacious and horrifying if true. We'll need solid proof, Miss Vance. Medical proof and the journal. Together, Eleanor, Thorne, and photographer Michael formulated a plan. They would return to Havenwood under cover of a medical relief team, claiming to investigate the lingering effects of the Great Silence as a historical medical anomaly. This would give them access to the town, Mr. Henderson, and Dr. Finch's house. The journey back was tense. The fog seemed to welcome them. As they entered, the familiar whispers and averted gazes filled Eleanor with dread. But this time she wasn't alone. They gained entry to Reverend Miller's house under the guise of medical relief. Miller Cunning seemed to welcome them, likely viewing it as evidence of the town's benign nature. While Miller was distracted, Thorne and Michael slipped away to Dr. Finch's house. Eleanor stayed with Miller, feigning concern for Mr. Henderson, whose room was heavily guarded. She knew she had to create a diversion. She looked at Miller, her voice raspy but gaining strength. "Reverend, Mr. Henderson is distressed. Have you considered that your harmony might be causing him more harm?" Miller's eyes narrowed. "He is cared for. His spirit needs to be recalibrated." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from Dr. Finch's house, followed by shouted whispers and hurried footsteps. It was Michael and Thorne. They had found the journal and been discovered. Miller's face contorted in a silent snarl. "They know," he hissed, his whisper furious. "The outsiders are trying to break our peace." He turned to Eleanor, eyes burning. "You brought this upon us, Miss Vance. You will pay the price." Eleanor knew this was it. The moment of truth. The final confrontation. The great silence was about to be shattered. She braced herself, ready to face the full force of Hemlock's desperate silent reign. The crash from Dr. Finch's house shattered Havenwood's facade. Reverend Miller, face a mask of furious desperation, lunged at Eleanor. She sidestepped, pushing past him, sprinting towards the commotion. At the Old Victorian, she saw Michael, the photographer, struggling with Constable Jebediah. Detective Thorne was on the ground. Old man Hemlock stood over him, eyes alight with cold, triumphant madness. "The journal!" Eleanor croaked. "Get the journal!" Michael, despite his struggle, secured Dr. Finch's leather-bound journal. He brandished it as Jebediah tried to disarm him. "You fools!" Hemlock hissed, his whisper gaining unnatural intensity. "You cannot undo what has been wrought. Havenwood is ours. Its silence is its strength." Eleanor remembered Elias's warning. The kelp, the conditioning, the aversion to loud sounds. Dr. Finch's final entry suggested a truth beyond physical symptoms. It was a pact, a psychological lock. She looked at the terrified townspeople, caught between outsiders and enforcers. They were still under the kelp's influence, bound by fear of vocalization. "This is not strength, Hemlock," Eleanor screamed, ignoring the searing pain. "This is fear. You stole their voices. You silenced their lives." The words ripped through her. Her raw, defiant shouts momentarily stunned everyone. The townspeople flinched, some clutching their throats, but others, for the first time, showed a flicker of recognition, a spark of defiance. Hemlock's face contorted in rage. "Silence her!" he shrieked, his own controlled whisper cracking. "Silence her now!" Jebediah, distracted, faltered. Michael seized the opportunity, throwing the journal to Eleanor. She caught it, scanning Dr. Finch's last entry. The silence, it's a pact, a terrible pact. The sacrifice, I must try to warn. The key is not to fight the silence, but to break the fear of sound, to associate sound not with pain, but with freedom. A revelation struck Eleanor. The kelp created aversion, pain linked to sound. But what if that pain could be overwhelmed by a sound so profound it shattered the conditioning? "Everyone," Eleanor rasped, her voice weak but urgent. "Listen to me. This pain, it's a lie. It's a trick. Your voices were stolen, but they are not gone." Miller and Jebediah moved towards her, grim, determined to silence her. Thorne, recovering, struggled up. Eleanor opened the journal to Dr. Finch's last entry, holding it up. "Doctor, Finch tried to warn you. He found a way. This silence is a prison. Break free. Find your voices. Scream, yell, sing." She knew it was a gamble. The pain was intense, but she had to try. She looked at the terrified faces, the children clinging to their parents. Then she looked at Sarah. Sarah, who had defied the silence. Eleanor took a deep breath, fighting the agonizing constriction. She focused on her mother singing a lullaby, a melody of warmth. With every ounce of will, she tried to sing. It was not beautiful, It was a raw, strained, guttural noise, a choked attempt at melody. But it was sound. A human voice, struggling against chains. The effort sent excruciating pain through her, causing her to stagger. But then, something miraculous happened. Sarah, watching Eleanor, tears streaming, took a trembling breath. She remembered her grandmother's stories, a faint, joyful hum. With a sob, Sarah let out a raw, desperate cry. Not a whisper, a broken, powerful sound. The sound rippled through the crowd. Some recoiled, clutching throats, but others, witnessing Sarah's defiance, felt a tremor of hope. Eleanor, throat burning, pushed through it. She opened her mouth again, focusing on a single powerful word: no. The word was raspy, but clear. A word of defiance. As she uttered it, the painful grip on her throat seemed to weaken, shocked by her will. Miller and Hemlock stared, disbelief and horror on their faces. Their control was slipping. Inspired by Eleanor's and Sarah's courage, Elias, the old fisherman, let out a guttural roar, a sound of release. Others followed, tentatively at first, then with increasing force. Whispers turned to strained groans, then to hoarse cries, and then, slowly, agonizingly, to shouts. A cacophony of pain and liberation, a symphony of broken silence. The fear, the conditioning, the pact. It was being broken by the sheer collective will to reclaim their voices. The pain was still there, but now it was a pain of breaking free. Hemlock screamed, a high-pitched, desperate whisper. "Stop them! Silence them! The harmony! You are destroying the harmony!" But his words drowned in the rising tide of liberated voices. Jebediah, overwhelmed, staggered back. Miller, face pale, stared, his fanaticism crumbling. The Maine State Police, spurred by Thorne's calls and Mr. Caldwell's press pressure, arrived as the cacophony peaked. They found a town in emotional uproar, not quiet, but raw, their voices emerging from years of forced silence. Hemlock, seeing his empire crumble, tried to escape, but Thorne, with Michael's help, apprehended him. Miller and Jebediah were also taken into custody, etched with disbelief. In the aftermath, it was a slow, painful process for Havenwood. The Kelp's effects lingered, many still struggling to speak aloud. But the fear was broken. Therapists and doctors from Boston helped them reclaim their voices. Eleanor, her voice healing, documented Havenwood's recovery. Her article, "The Community That Spoke Only in Whispers, A Lie Unmasked," became a Pulitzer-winning exposé. Havenwood slowly healed. Whispers still lingered, but now punctuated by laughter, conversations, and joyful shouts of children rediscovering their voices. The fog still rolled in, but it no longer felt like a shroud of secrecy. Havenwood, though marked by its past, was finally truly free.